Okay, so we're going to all say hi on webcam very briefly now, just so you know we can put a sort of a voice to a face. So hello, my name's Joe Humphreys. I work as a consolidation accountant in the whole of government's account team.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Lowe, working as a senior consolidation accountant in the whole government accounts team.
Hi everyone, I'm Natalia Cruz-Fajado and I'm also a consolidation accountant in the whole of government's accounts team.
Hi, I'm Sally King and I'm also a consolidation accountant in the WGA team.
Okay, so you won't see us now, but you should be able to still hear our voices. So what we were hoping to do is we're planning to use this session just to recap a few of the key points from the training video, as well as update you on anything that's happened since then and just provide a bit of advice on addressing common issues. We've put aside a lot of time later on to answer questions. So they can be about anything whole of government's account related really. As part of answering them, we might move on to the occasional different document, maybe a copy of the DCT. The screen might go blank for a moment when we do that, but don't worry if that happens too much. Right, so on the screen now, you should be seeing the agenda for the webinar. We're hoping for it to last about 90 minutes or so. Again, we're going to start with recapping a few key points, as well as some changes to the DCT, and then we'll move on to that first Q&A session. That one we're going to use to focus on general questions. That's WGA boundaries, how to use the DCT effectively, forms you might need to fill in, and anything like that. We'd appreciate if you could submit those general questions by about 11:25, and we'll try and get through to them in that first Q&A session. We'll also cover a few FAQs during that session as well. So after that, we're going to have a look at a few common issues, and then we're going to use the second Q&A session to focus on technical accounting questions. It might be the case you ask us a technical question that we can't answer straight away. It just might not be something we've come across before. If that's the case, we'll aim to send you a response separately by email at a later date. Again, it'd be great if you could submit those technical questions by about 12, so we can do them in the second Q&A session. If you really do have any questions or comments, then don't hesitate. There are no silly questions. We're going to aim to throw in the odd fun facts about WGA as well, just to mix things up a bit, so keep an ear out for those. And at the end of the session, there's going to be a really quick survey that we'd be very grateful if you could fill in for us. Just to start then, we thought we'd ask Natalia to go through a couple of quick polls to gauge where everyone is with the WGA process overall. As mentioned before, we're going to be using Slido. So you're going to have to use your phones or tablets to join those interactive sessions at www.sli.do. And again, the code is 7010. Okay, and as I say, please just submit us any questions about WGA overall, and we'll be accepting those from now until after the webinar.
Great, thanks Joe. So hi everyone, it's Natalia here. Firstly, we would like to know how many of you have completed a DCT before. So please go to Slido and submit your answer now. Great, so at the moment we can see that around 55% of you have already completed a DCT before, and 45, so about half of you, oh, it's changing, but I think roughly we can take a 50-50 number. So just continuing, now we move on to the second poll, and what we would like to know on this poll is how you felt about the training video. And if you haven't watched it yet, then please click that option. So go on to Slido now and submit your question, submit your answer. Let me get through them. So yeah, about 64% of you thought the information presented in the pre-recorded training video was about right, 70% at the moment. None of you thought it was too much detail, which is obviously good. But 30% of you thought that more information was needed. So that's great. We're going to move now. I'm going to hand over back to Joe so he could talk you through the rest of the presentation.
Okay, thanks Natalia. Right, so now we're just going to recap a bit of the training information from that video, including deadlines and thresholds. Hopefully, if you've already watched the video, this will be familiar to you, but it'll be useful to recap very quickly.
Hello, it's Sally again. So on screen, you should now be seeing the overall timeframes for the WGA process. So you may well be aware that the DCT hasn't been published yet this year. So we're aiming to have this out within the next couple of weeks. So please be on the lookout. We'll be sending out an email as soon as the DCT is available. So we'd imagine that most central government departments will be agreeing balances with other departments using the CG01 forms. So this is a requirement for all balances and transactions that are above £5 million. So June would be your key month for getting your unaudited DCT return ready for that early July deadline. Once that's been done, for the larger entities, your pack will be audited, and the WGA team will also have a look to let you know if there are any issues. Your Cycle 2 return will then reflect your audited accounts, including the changes requested by your DCT audit or any communications you've had from the WGA team. You can request a copy of the matches analysis tool during the period between your Cycle 1 and your Cycle 2 returns, and you can use this to show where there are data mismatches between yourselves and other bodies. Last year, we started sending this out on a regular basis to central government during this period, so we'd be very happy to continue doing that. So you should now be seeing the central government deadlines. You'll see there are a number of forms you should be returning alongside the DCT. So if you do submit your DCT information by Oscar, please don't forget just to email those forms over to us as well. So if you're not sure how these forms work or whether you do need to complete them, please have a look at the training video and also the central government guidance, which is going to be shortly going up on our webpage. So as you can see, we're also asking for a copy of your final accounts along with your Cycle 2 return. We often do need to use these alongside your DCT return when we're completing the notes for the accounts. Okay, so you should now be seeing some threshold information on your screen, which we'd like you to familiarise yourself with. So the minor body threshold this year is £20 million for all the categories that you should be seeing on the screen. If your organisation falls below £20 million for all of these categories, you don't need to complete a DCT return, but what you should do instead is to fill out a CG03 form to us, and again, that's going to be available on our webpage. So you should also be able to see the audit threshold for your DCT pack to be audited for central government, and that is £2 billion.
Okay, thanks, Sally. We thought based on that, we just take a very quick poll. It's just going to be, is your department above or below the audit threshold? Right, so it's looking as though about 70% are above the audit threshold, with the remaining 30 being below. So that means, yeah, the majority of you are going to need to fill out that CG03 form. As we were going on with this webinar, we thought we'd throw a couple of fun facts about WGA in there. The first of which is that the government staff numbers are roughly 4.4 million at the moment. That's larger than the population of Croatia, and the government spends about £191.1 billion a year on those staff. So if you spent that on the cinema, you'd be able to see about 16 billion films, spending around 4.5 million years in the cinema.
Hi everyone, it's Natalia again. I'm now going to run you through slide 8 of the presentation, talking about the DCT process, specifically the Cycle 1 unaudited data. So now we'll move on to the steps involved in completing your DCT for anyone who needs a refresher. Getting ready to use the spreadsheet is going to include ensuring your macros and VBA settings are set up correctly as covered in the training video. The data entry for your Cycle 1 submission involves firstly entering your statement of accounts data and then entering the details of transactions with other public sector entities. The CPIT Transactions tab, where you enter your transactions with counterparties, will now be available up front in the pack. We'll give you more information on this later. Your accounts data entry process will be different. depending on whether you choose to use the pro forma or the trial balance completion method. Moving on to slide 9, we're now going to cover the cycle 2 process, which is going to involve updating your accounts and counterparty data for any adjustments necessitated by your accounts audit, the audit of your DCT pack, or any mismatches or other issues picked up during the DCT completion process. Moving on to slide 10, and finally for this recap session, the link to the WGA.gov.uk web pages and the email address for the team are shown on screen. If you are being allocated an account manager in the WGA team, you should be hearing from them very shortly if you haven't already. If you don't have an account manager, then you can still get in touch with us for support with any queries. Just use the team's email address that we've shown you on the slide. If you need to get yourself set up for submitting your WGA return via OSCAR, please contact the OSCAR support team who can help. And now I will hand over to Sally to discuss the next section.
Thanks, Natalia. So just a quick reminder to everyone, please do keep sending in your questions via the webinar software for our Q&A session. So before we get to that point, we're now going to go over what's changed in the DCT pack this year, along with a few handy tips if you do encounter any problems along the way. So as usual, there are some new counterparty IDs and also some new account codes, or SCOAs as we refer to them sometimes, this year. A full list of these changes is going to be on the Updates tab of the DCT. So I would definitely recommend familiarising yourself with the changes on that tab once you get the DCT, before you then move on to complete it. So we're going to outline a few of the major changes to watch out for when it comes to account code and other related changes in the DCT pack. So as you can see on the screen, on the Taxation Income tab, we've added some categories. We've added categories for income from bank surcharges, income from the soft drinks industry levy, and for Northern Ireland, council tax income from local authorities. The Operating Income tab also includes some new categories. MHCLG have new lines in order to record income from the NDR levy and the NDR tariff. So this information was previously collected on the Operating Cost tab, but we've moved it here for clarity as it relates to income. There's also a new line to record PFI grant income received from other parts of central government. So operating costs includes a new line under grants for pension top-up payments to local authorities. So this is linked to a new SCOA in a brand new match relationship that we've created for pension top-up funding, income and expense. The current trade and other receivables tab includes a new line for recording prepayments received by the consolidated fund. So that line that you see there is only for use by the consolidated fund. And finally, we don't have this one on the screen, but it's quite a straightforward change. On the Additional Information tab, we've got a new line asking you to enter your year-end date as a number. So recording the information here in that way makes it easier for us and for our auditors to know when any organisations included in the consolidation have got non-standard year-end dates.
Thank you, Sally. I'm going to talk about DCT unlocking. We have made some changes to the functionality of the DCT, focus on the counterparty transactions entry. The CPID transaction sheet will now be visible in the pack from the start. Previously, you could only review the CPID transaction sheet after you have completed validating your main accounts data. This based on the feedback we have received from you, who suggested it would be helpful to see this early because it helps people completing the performa. The change should also stop issues whereby validating your accounts data after you create the CPID sheet could sometimes cause the pack to get stuck at an early stage. This change means the step 3 on the Instruction tab, which was previously used to create your CPID transaction sheet, is now used to validating your CPID transaction sheet. We would still suggest that the approach of completing your accounts data first, then moving on to the counterparty transactions. However, having a CPID sheet available alongside can serve a valuable check. As you can see straight away after entering a figure onto one of the sheet and how this filters through the CPID transaction sheet. One other big change is that any department doesn't need auditing now will be able to unlock their DCT themselves and progress onto cycle 2 after they have sent their cycle 1 to us. The pack will calculate whether your DCT pack should be audited based on the accounts data you have entered in cycle 1. If the answer is no, it will allow you to unlock without a password. Please remember to submit the locked cycle 1 pack to us first.
Thanks, Jen. Okay, so one of the biggest changes this year is going to be to the way you enter your CPID transactions. There's now 2 different methods that we're going to be using. So the first method is going to be more beneficial for those of you that have a lot of CPID data to include. Instead of adding rows for each account code, we've added a new sheet called the CPID input sheet. You can basically add all your counterparty data into there in one batch load, just specifying an account code, an instigator, a CPID code, and an amount. Then if you hit the refresh button at the top, that's going to transfer it all into the CPID transaction sheet, posting it under each account code for you. This means you won't have to individually add a line for each account code as you previously had to. The second method is going to be pretty much the same as with previous years, and you'll only be using the CPID transaction sheet. Simply find the account code you're looking for, fill in the relevant counterparty transactions, adding the new row using the button at the top as needed. Which method you want to use is probably going to depend on how many CPID transactions you have, or whether you just find it easier to use the old method. Just please be aware the DCT is going to default to the newer method when you open it, and you're going to need to use a button at the top of the CPID transaction sheet to switch back to the old method. Please bear in mind that if you do switch to the old method, you can't then switch back. If you want a bit more detail on that, you can have a look at the training video or the written guidance, which we're going to send you links to at the end of the webinar slides.
Thank you, Joe. This year, we have made some changes to our financial instrument tab. There are 3 tabs which have financial instrument content on your DCT. The financial assets tab, financial liability, and also financial instrument tab. The majority of the process will be familiar to you if you have completed a DCT before, but we have tried to make it clear and more user-friendly, as well as improving some necessary changes to reflect the new IFRS 9 financial instrument standard. Let's move on to the financial assets tab, which you can see on the screen. There are going to be 4 steps to this tab. Step 1, where we ask for your total short-term and long-term investments, which covers shares, deposits, loans, and other categories. At step 2, we ask you to split this balance out between those with other WGA counterparties, which are internal balances, and those which entities external to WGA. The only changes you will see so far are some extra validation boxes at step 2, which are there to help make sure the data is robust. We will also be checking that amount you're telling us is inside the WGA boundary here. It's the same as the amount you're telling us is internal when you do your CPID allocations. To help with this, we have told you which amount codes map to each line here. For step 3, please note the new category of financial assets. As per IFRS 9, the categories are now amortized cost, fair value through profit or loss, and fair value through OCI. External balances are going to be brought through from the early tables, and you should then split this out manually into the relevant categories. We have some validation checks here to make sure the amount split out into the 3 categories matches the total balance available to be split out for each line. Finally, for step 4, you need to provide more information on external current loans and deposits. This is a new step in line with IFRS 9 requirements. If you don't have external balance for current loan or current deposit, then you won't need to complete this table. Now I'm going to pass on to Natalia.
Thank you, Jennifer. So going into now slide 21, I'm going to talk about the financial liabilities tab. So the financial liabilities tab follows a similar structure to the other financial assets tab, in that you are asked to firstly provide the totals and then to split these out into internal and external amounts. You'll notice that some lines in this sheet which are marked for the use of specific entities only, as with the banknotes in circulation line shown now on screen. These new lines allow particular entities to better classify a particular type of balance. Please do not enter data into these lines if you are not the entity in question. For step 2, please split out internal and external balances as with the previous sheet. And for step 3, please follow the methodology from the previous sheet. There are 2 categories available to classify your financial liabilities. These are amortized cost and fair value through profit or loss. And now I'll hand over to Sally.
Thanks, Natalia. So I'm going to talk you through the Financial Instruments tab. So the Financial Instruments tab contains disclosure tables, and that's in order to comply with IFRS 9 and 7 requirements. So on this tab, you'll be providing details on fair value equivalents for amounts that you hold at amortized cost, and where you hold financial instruments at fair value already, whether that was determined based on level 1, 2, or 3 inputs. So depending on your answers to the 5 questions on material risk, which you should be able to see on screen now, you may also need to complete some additional information to that, which we'll run through. The Financial Instruments tab contains data fed through from the Financial Asset and Financial Liabilities tab. So those are the 2 that we've just run through a little while ago, along with the Trade and Other Payables and Trade and Other Receivables tabs. So that's just a note, just to make sure that you've completed the information on those tabs before you move on to this one. So we'd be very grateful if you could read the instructions on each table clearly to determine whether we're requesting total amounts or external amounts. So the external amounts would be amounts you hold with bodies not on our counterparty list. So we also reflect on this tab the IFRS 9 changes you saw on the previous 2 tabs, i.e. That financial assets are split between the 3 new categories and financial liabilities split between the 2 new categories for those. So as we said, there are 5 questions at the top of the tab about material risk. So if you answered yes to the question, did you need to disclose credit risk as a material risk in your accounts, you'd also need to complete the expected credit loss table, which you can now see on your screen. So the information which we are collecting on credit risk for your financial assets has changed. Again, that's in line with IFRS 9. So IFRS 9 changes specify that when recognising a financial asset, you should be creating an allowance for receivables and expenses in the P&L. So that's done by identifying the present value of lifetime expected credit loss and multiplying by the probability of default over the next 12 months. And we'd expect that to be reviewed and updated in subsequent periods. So where you calculated loss allowance based on this methodology, enter that into the appropriate cell for 12-month expected credit losses. So we've included some guidance information around how to complete this table within the DCT, as you can see in the screenshot that we're sharing. So as I mentioned, there's 5 questions about material risk. So the first one is credit risk, and the other 4 questions ask you to confirm if liquidity risk, interest rate risk, FX risk, or market price risk, if any of those were disclosed as material within your own accounts. So if you answered yes to any of those questions, this year we're changing how we collect information about it from you. Previously, we asked you to fill out specific tables. However, this year we've given a blank space within the tab for you to copy or screenshot the relevant risk disclosure from your own accounts. So we'd ask you to provide the disclosure tables and also the written narrative from your accounts. As relatively few organisations need to provide this data, this change should make it easier for those organisations. The WGA team will be able to use the information directly from the DCTs of the organisations who do answer yes to those questions.
So we do understand that some of these changes are quite technical. So please don't hesitate to send over any questions you have, and we'll do our best to answer them. And also don't forget that all of these changes are covered in more detail on both the training video and the written guidance on the GovUK webpage.
Great, so now moving on to slide 26, we're going to cover speed and file size. We have simplified our background coding substantially this year, meaning the file you download is much smaller. Due to this smaller file size, the DCT is now going to be emailed out to everyone, but can still be downloaded from the gov.uk webpage if you choose. This means you're not downloading a file off the internet, so if your firewalls are stopping you due to configuration, that should solve the problem. The other problem people were having was their settings not being correct, causing the file not to configure properly. The configuration setup is now a lot simpler, so all the entities which were having issues before should be able to use a DCT downloaded from the gov.uk webpage. If they lose the copy we email to them, I'd like everyone to please try and configure this themselves before they ask us to configure it for them. The validations and the locking should also run substantially quicker. We made some improvement last year, but there have been far more improvement this year. And now, moving on to slide 27, we're going to cover a section on handy tips. So we'll finish this section with some handy tips on dealing with DCT issues. Firstly, if you choose to download the pack, select Save As rather than Open. If an error appears when you try to select the completion method, it may be because you have opened the DCT directly from the web page rather than saving it down first. If you have a runtime error when pressing a button involving a macro process, we'd suggest saving, closing, and reopening the file. This should set off some automatic background coding, which may mean the macros work when you try again. If you do need to send us a copy of your DCT, it is a good idea to send us the version from just before when the macro was run. Before you press any of the step buttons on the instructions tab, we'd advise saving down a separate copy of the DCT. If there is a problem with the macro, then it may be easier to revisit a previous saved version. So now I'll hand over to Joe to lead on section 3.
Okay, thanks, Natalia. Right, we're going to move into the first Q&A session now. Again, this is addressing any general questions you have. We're going to start with the questions you've asked us as we've been speaking, and then we'll move on to some FAQs. If you do think of any additional question while this session is in progress, go ahead and submit it, and we'll try and answer it as soon as we can. We thought while we're just waiting for the odd few last questions to come in, we'd just give you another fun WGA fact. So we have that the government generated about £720.8 billion of income in 1617. By comparison, the largest company in the world is Walmart. They generated only about 370 billion in revenue in the same year. So, you know, nearly twice as much there. Okay then, so we'll move on to the questions you guys have been asking. So we have had one earlier, a very simple one. Are these slides going to be shared with us? Yes, they will be. Jen, have these already been put on the...
Yeah, it's actually the handouts. So if you open the handouts little icon, then you will see the slides already there. So you can use it as when you like.
Okay, great, yeah. So everyone should be getting the slides. There's also going to be a video of this webinar put on YouTube within the next few days, so you'll be able to watch it all again then. If there's anything you want to revisit, we'll send you an email about that later. Okay, so we've got one here, quite a simple one. What does the DCT mean? Sorry, maybe.
Yeah, I suppose I can answer that. DCT stands for Data Collection Tool. So sorry, we should actually make it more clear. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, maybe we should have put that in earlier. It's basically a big Excel document that's going to be emailed out to everyone within the next couple of weeks, and you'll just fill it in and send it back to us. And that's how we create the whole of government's accounts. Okay, so we have another question here. Do you have updated deadlines for devolved administration?
Yeah, so with devolved administrations, you will, your account manager, if they haven't already, will be in touch, and they will be discussed on an individual basis, and then those dates will be confirmed and updated directly with you.
Okay, thanks, Natalie. We've got well, not so much a question, but it's just a reminder to Northern Ireland bodies that their point of contact is the Department for Finance, not HM Treasury. I don't know if we have anything more to add to that. Or...
Yeah, I think I'm happy to take that action and to communicate to the Northern Irish entities to contact directly the Department for Finance.
Yeah, so just to add to that, I suppose that the other devolved administrations in Scotland and Wales will also have their own central devolved contacts. Apologies, possibly we should have sort of popped that on, but yeah, just to let you know, you might also have your other devolved contacts as well. But the information we put up earlier is just our main WGA email address.
Thanks for that, guys. Another question. For taxation income, has consideration been made for new tax raising powers in Wales?
Yeah, so I'll take that. I made reference earlier to the changes we've made to the taxation income tab. And as far as I know, that incorporates all the changes that we've been advised of that need to be made. So considering if there are new tax raising powers, one thing to consider may be whether the body that is responsible for collecting those taxes is actually a minor body due to the level of taxes raised, because potentially if it's a minor body, we wouldn't then need to include it within the data collection tool because they wouldn't be completing a DCT. However, if you think that there is a new line that we should be incorporating within the DCT or something we've missed, it would be really helpful if you could send us an email today, and I'll make sure that I have a look at that this afternoon after the webinar, and we can sort of deal with that directly.
Okay, thanks, Sally. That was helpful. What is the impact of IFRS 16 on WGA?
Well, this year we only have the IFRS 9 changing, but IFRS 16 is coming next year, and so it's watch out for 1920 DCT. I hope this answers your question. If not, could you please send us more detailed question you're going to raise about this one?
Okay, so nothing to worry about in the short term, but presumably in this webinar next year there'll be a lot more on that. Okay, we've got here, how will GMP pension losses be treated? I think that's one that we might have to come back to you with an email on. Sorry, I'm not really familiar with that myself. We'll aim to get you a response on that within the next few days. Sorry, it's just not something that we've encountered before. Another question here. Are there any changes to the DCT relating to IFRS 15 dual reporting?
Not at this stage again. I mean, this year for 18-19, you only focus on IFRS 9 changing. So all the relevant standard changing will be impacting on next year DCT. So do watch out on that. So if you have even further question about this IFRS 15, we probably will chat offline. So please send us the email information or request when we will reply you via the email, please.
We've got a question here, which is when will the DCT process be moving away from Excel towards an online style of data collection?
Yeah, I'm thinking our discovering stage from our DCT designing team is already completed. It's in January. So we collected all kinds of feedback from local authority and also central government. And I'm thinking the newsletter from our central OSCA team and to you is already set up a very detailed timeline So please watch out for further newsletter from our OSCA team, which is whoever responsible for designing the whole package. I'm not going to say what exactly time we were using the web-based portal or any other form we will use. So I would like to update you while we having more details. So at the moment, please watch out of space for the newsletter from either our team or OSCA development team. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. A question here. Do you need to complete all intergovernment related transactions on the DCT?
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to answer this one. So we understand that you may have different levels of materiality. Different organisations may either record transactions to a differing level or have the reporting available only at a particular level. So we would ask you just to report intercompany transactions in as much detail and to as low a level as granularity as you do have available. And one thing I suppose to bear in mind is that for larger departments and organisations that are agreeing large level of balances over £5 million, you do have the chance within the CGO1 form process to actually agree with the other side of the transaction, the counterparty, to sort of agree the amounts you're going to report or let us know if there's a particularly large difference, why that is. So yeah, it would just be to as much detail as you have available is really helpful to us because a lot of our work during the WGA process is in resolving data mismatches. So the fewer that we can get by sort of having a lot of information available in SEPA transactions is really helpful and beneficial to the whole process.
Okay, thanks, Sally. I suppose actually following on from that question, we have another one here. How do you advise of a mistake or correction after submission?
Okay, yeah, happy to answer that one as well. So if you've submitted your cycle 1 return and then you realise that there's some information that you should have included or something you want to change, at that point you do have the cycle 2 version of the DCT is still to come and you'll be able to make those changes during cycle 2. However, if it's at the point where you've already locked and submitted your final cycle 2 audited version of your data, and then realise at that point that there was an omission or something that should have been different, we would ask you to, if it's anything other than sort of very non-trivial amounts or differences, please to contact us via email and just let us know of those changes. And if it's necessary, we can then make those changes by journal at kind of the next stage of the accounts process. But it's always very helpful to know if there's something that you've spotted, even if you aren't able to change it yourself at that point.
Okay, thanks again, Sally. We've got one here. Should our submission include subsidiary companies?
So I would say if you're completing accounts on a group basis, then you would also be completing the DCT on that basis. But if it's a particular question, maybe it's something that's changed recently in your organisation that you're not sure about, possibly you're moving from sort of single to group accounts, it might be something that you want to pop us an email about just so we can be sure that we're sort of picking up the correct detail on that. But generally, I would say if you're working on a group accounts basis, you'd reflect that when you do your WGA return.
Okay, thank you, Sally. We've got just a follow-up question on the IFRS 15 question that came in a few minutes ago. It says that we're implementing IFRS 15 this year and 16 next year, so how do we go about implementing it? I mean, I'd assume the answer is, maybe Jen, you want to take over, but that it's something you'll have to do for your own accounts, but not for the DCT, for the WGA purposes?
Yes, I'm thinking this is something you have to do your own accounts, but could you please, in the comment box, highlighting you're actually using a new standards for IFRS 9 for 18-19 DCT. So we were highlighting this, but obviously you're the pioneer for doing this, and I don't think any other department is adopting this IFRS standards just yet. So thank you for letting us know. Thank you.
Okay. So I think now we're going to move on to just a few of the FAQs. If you guys want to keep sending your questions in, please go ahead. We'll prioritize those over the FAQs. So send them in as we're doing these, and we'll come to them as soon as we can. Okay. So our first FAQ is how do we know which entities are within the WGA boundary, and what do I do if I can't find the CPID I need?
Okay, so the WGA boundary is roughly equivalent to the public sector. So that's going to include central and local government as well as public corporations. So the best place to check if a particular entity is included on our CPID list, and that's our list of all the WGA counterparties that are included and the unique ID code for each of them. So the best place to check is the CPID list published on our gov.uk page, and that will be available on this year's page very shortly, in line with our other forms and guidance becoming available. So this list is a fully comprehensive one, and it lists all the counterparty IDs that we're including in the process this year. So if you know that an entity is public sector, but you have a look on that list and you don't find it, it might be because it's a smaller entity, which is classed as a minor body. And so therefore they're exempt from completing a WGA return. So another reason could be that it's consolidated into a department's return and it uses the main departmental CPID, but it hasn't been named individually on the CPID list. So we will try and name the individual bodies as much as possible, but it could just be one of those that's not named. So if you're unsure about a particular entity after you've had a look at the list, please do get in touch with us and we can help you further.
Okay, thanks, Sally. We've just had another question come in, actually. It said that you mentioned earlier the webinar is being uploaded to YouTube. What channel is it on, or where do I go to find it? So it's on a channel just called WGA. The privacy channels on the YouTube channel might not allow you to search for it. So we'll be sending you out a link at as soon as it's put online. There'll also be a link within the central government WGA original training video to the webinar, and vice versa, so you'll be able to access it that way. But if you ever are unsure of where to find it, if you just send us an email, we'll be happy to send you another link out. Okay, moving on to the next FAQ now. It says, I have no opening balances in my DCT as I didn't submit one last year. However, we do have some balances which should be reflected in the opening position. How would we do this?
Yeah, I could take this one. And this can be fixed by adding the prior year balance in the prior year adjustment column. There are no need to have it within the column for prior years as long as the adjustment is there. You will need to put it in an adjustment on both statement of financial position and the relevant individual tab. If you did submit a DCT last year but aren't seeing an opening balance, so please contact WGA team so we can fix this issue for you rather than adding this as a prior year adjustments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Another FAQ. I've completed some data on a tab, but I'm unsure of what account code this is linked to and how this will show up on the CPID transaction tab. How do I find out?
Yeah, so I can answer that one. So this question is a little less relevant if you use the trial balance method to complete your DCT. So if this is the case, you map your trial balance codes to those used within the DCT, which then populates the majority of the information onto the tabs for you. So you will already be aware of the mapping between your trial balance data and the account codes which show on the CPID transactions tab. However, if you use the performer method, you will be completing all your accounts data onto individual tabs. It may then be more important for you to understand how this flows through to the account codes shown on the CPID transactions tab. One thing that should make this easier this year is the CPID transaction sheet being visible from the start of the process. You can therefore complete some data and then cross-check the CPID transaction sheet to see how this is being brought through. If you do need to see a full list of how the cell map to the account codes, you can look at the pro forma mapping sheet within the DCT.
Okay, thanks, Natalia. We've had one more question come in. It's asking us, is YouTube the best method for putting the training video out there, as sometimes there can be adverts and other interruptions? I think my understanding of YouTube is that a video has to be monetized for adverts to appear in it. Obviously, we're not going to be doing that, so there should be absolutely no adverts appearing in it. Unfortunately, because the training videos are of such large size, I think they're about 2 to 3 gig each, it's just too much to send out to you via email. And YouTube really is the easiest and best free video hosting website out there. So that's why we use that. If you do find adverts on the video, let us know, because they shouldn't be on there. So we'll get in contact with YouTube if that is the case. We might have time for 1 or 2 more FAQs now. So moving on to the next one, we've got when entering CPID data, the instigating entity description cell doesn't automatically pick up my CPID. Why is this? So I'll answer that one quickly. It's just that many central government accounts are completed at a group level and so have multiple CPIDs available to use as instigators. Because of this, we don't automatically include an instigator CPID, but ask for it to be entered manually. Next up, we have I need to make a correction to my DCT data, but I've already submitted my DCT. How do I go about this? I think we had a similar question to this earlier, actually, so we might skip over that one. What should I do if I get stuck when completing the DCT, or think of a question I didn't raise at the webinar and I need more help and support?
Yeah, I can answer that one. Again, we have to ask you to watch the training video and reading the written guidance as many times as possible. If you miss any parts, then the answer may well likely be there. So the written guidance will be published on WGA website page shortly. But we will send out the link to the training video by email, which Joe already said, and we will have a cross-reference for the webinar training video and also the training video recording. So if you have a specific question which we haven't addressed here, please send us an email so we can assist you in detail. Please also see the copy of the DCT if you have any issues you would like to ask to investigating further. And please use your DCT in the header of your email so we can identify your the department and the files and retrieving this easily. So thank you so much for bearing with us. At the moment, we are speed up to try and publish our DCT, either next week or the following week. Thank you so much for that.
Okay, thanks for that, everyone. We have had a couple more questions in, but I think we'll answer those in the second Q&A session now, just so we can keep on time. So I think we're going to move on now to common issues. Just before we do that, if you could just keep submitting any questions you may have, we'll aim to get to them in the next session. Okay, so we'll move on to common issues now.
Okay, thanks, Joe. So we'll start off with talking about signage and decimal places. So on the majority of the DCT pack, including on the CPID transactions tab, you'll need to use signage to indicate your credits and your debits. So for example, a trade liability figure is entered as negative and is brought through to the CPID transactions tab as negative. So when allocating part of this figure to a WGA entity, you'd need to remember to enter the matching signage there. So there may be a rare occasion where you would need to enter the opposite signage. So that could be when you have received a refund, for instance. You will receive an amber validation warning to let you know if you do enter opposite signage, and that's just a reminder to have a look and see if you do need to correct this, or if it is valid, just to add an explanation in the box. So there are some sections of the DCT where the usual rules regarding signage don't apply, and this is to do with how we need to collect information on some of our disclosure account codes. So figures that are usually negative are entered without signage, so as if they were positive figures, on the Restatement Analysis tab and also on the Contingent Liabilities tab. So please be aware that any amounts that reduce your contingent liabilities, such as if your obligations have expired in year, would need to be entered as negative in order to reduce a liability stated as positive. So figures in the DCT should be entered as pounds thousands. So for example, a figure of 10,000 would be entered as 10. So there are some areas of the DCT where we ask for whole numbers. So those are on the operating cost tab when you're providing your staff numbers, and also on the additional information tab when you're letting us know the number of PFI contracts and also the number of exit packages. Exit packages can be an area where information is accidentally entered incorrectly because on this tab we're asking for the volume of exit packages in whole numbers and also the cost of exit packages, which would be in pounds thousands. So we do sometimes find that the data is entered the wrong way round, or that the cost of exit packages is entered in pounds rather than pounds thousands. So we're just making you aware of this as something to look out for when you're completing the additional information tab.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Sally. We're now going to have a brief little recap on opening balances and restatements. So if you could please check that your opening balances are complete before you try to enter any accounts data. They should obviously match last year's closing balances and the balance sheet should balance. As you should be able to see on that slide, you'll only need to check last year's balances at this point. Your 18-19 column won't balance until you submitted all of your accounts data into the various tabs. So you don't need to look at this year's column just yet. If there is a problem with the macros when creating your pack, this could result in missing or incomplete opening balances. If your opening balances aren't correct, then just please email us at the WGA team and we'll try and resolve this for you. It's important that you don't proceed with the pack or enter restatements for missing opening balances if that is the case. If you've made restatements to your opening balances, you're going to need to enter these on the balance sheet and also on the relevant individual tab. So for instance, if you're adjusting your intangible assets, you need to use the restatements columns on the balance sheet and also the adjustments line on the intangibles tab.
Thank you, Joe. And we have now taken a minute to see another poll. So the question is, how many of you have completed your draft 2018-19 accounts? Let's just give a minute, see. Okay, the percentage continue changing, so I will announce it in a minute. Okay, I think now probably the right time. 14% of you say that you got a long way to go. So about 39% you say you're about halfway there, and 21% you're not even started. So finishing line in sight is about 32% of you. Thank you so much for that. This is really helpful for us to understand. If you do miss your deadline, what's the reason for that? Thank you.
People are actually a lot further ahead then than I thought they would be.
Yeah, very
well
pleased.
done, everyone.
Thank you.
Now, moving to slide 36, I'm going to talk about counterparty allocation. So we'll cover some issues with how amounts are allocated to counterparties, which can result in errors or cause mismatches between your own data and that of other WGA entities. For most SCOAs, you are likely to have a mix of WGA counterparties, which you enter onto the CFID transaction sheet, and non-WGA counterparties. However, there are some account codes which we expect will be 100% allocated to WGA counterparties. Codes we expect to be fully allocated to WGA entities include the following: public dividend capital, which sometimes appears as PDC in an account code description, supplies received from or amounts due to the consolidated fund, all government grants SCOAs, taxation and social security amounts due to HMRC, and interest payable account codes, where the SCOA description makes it clear this is within another part of government, such as interest payable to local government. For taxes due to HMRC, please ensure that the amount is fully allocated to IRT 813. This is the CFID for HMRC's tax balances. There is also a CFID named HMR 041 for HMRC as a government department if you have non-tax dealings with HMRC. We have also added some new validations this year, which look at whether you have allocated the majority of the balance under this particular account codes and will flag up if this is not the case. It's important to grant SCOAs. It is important that grant SCOAs are fully allocated, as otherwise this will add to the uneliminated error in the final account. We'd really appreciate the work that you put into grant scale allocation each year to help us minimize the final error count. Other issues with counterparty allocation which can result in mismatches are covered in the matches analysis and mismatches area of the training video. So make sure that you visit those videos if you need more information. And now I'll hand over to Sally to continue talking about counterparty allocation.
Thanks, Natalia. So for most tabs on the DCT, you fill in your total balances, and you don't need to worry about splitting that out between entities internal and external to WGA until you reach the point of doing your CP transactions. However, for a few specific areas, we do ask for a split between internal and external balance amounts as part of the main tab. And a few of these we've seen a little bit earlier. So those areas are the other financial asset and other financial liabilities tabs, which feed into financial instruments, and also contingent liabilities. So the idea here is that when you're providing a figure for balances internal to WGA, this should match to the total of the counterparty allocations that you make for that relevant account code when you do fill out the CP Transactions tab. So as you'll be completing your accounts data and the CP Transactions tab at slightly different stages of the process, we would ask that you please go back and check those tabs after you've completed your CP Transactions information, just to make sure that they do tally up. So as mentioned when we covered financial instruments, we've added the account code references alongside the table where you split your balances between internal and external, and hopefully that should help you when you're cross-checking between the two. And also having the CP Transactions tab available from the beginning will hopefully make this much easier for you this year.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. Thanks for that. Right, so we're going to move on to the second Q&A session now. Hopefully this will be more technical accounting questions you have about the data supplied within the DCT. Format's going to be exactly the same as last time, so we'll start with the questions you've all submitted and then we'll move on to FAQs. Again, while we're waiting for you to just get any last minute questions in, we'll just do our final fun fact, which is government total assets were equal to 1,903 billion as of the 31st of March 2017. That's enough to buy about 9,611 Neymars. If each Premier League squad had, if each Premier League club had a squad of 25 players, and there are 20 teams, that means you could have 19 Premier League-sized leagues, all with players as expensive as Neymar. Okay then. So we're now going to go through a few of your questions. So which one shall we do first? Okay. We've got one here. For balances over £5 million, which the party is responsible for sending out, which party is responsible for sending out the request for agreement of amounts to the provider or supplier?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer this one. So we'd normally ask the instigator of the transaction to send that out. So that would be, for instance, if you're completing the data collection pack, if there's a transactional balance for which you'd be putting that onto your sheet, you'd be the instigator, then we'd ask you to initiate that CG01 process. However, if you haven't heard from the other side, if you're aware that there's a large counterparty balance and you've not heard from the other side, we'd be very happy for you as the receiver, I suppose you term it, to start off that process if you don't hear from the instigator.
Okay, and just a reminder that you can keep those questions coming right now. Sorry, 1 second. Okay then, we have one here. Do we only need to input CP transactions for which we are the instigating body, or do we need to put all transactions?
Yeah, so you would only need to input CP transactions for which you're the instigator. So the process should work that you'll input the transactions for which you're the instigator, and all of the other counterparty bodies within WGA will all be doing the same thing. So the idea is, for instance, if you're putting in a receivable amount that you had with another department, they would then be putting in the payable amount, with kind of equal and opposite data there. And the idea is that that information should then net off when we upload it all up into our system. And we kind of get automatic eliminations happen that way. So that's kind of the wider concept behind what you're doing on the SEPA transactions. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, thanks, Sally. We've had a couple more coming in about IFRS 15, but I think we're going to come back to you with emails on that later with just a bit more detail. I'm not sure we can necessarily answer all of those right now. So if you do have another question about IFRS 15, then if you just send it as an email to us, then we'll aim to get back to you. Okay, well, that's all the questions you guys have asked so far, but do please keep them coming. As I said before, we will prioritise them over the FAQs. Until then, though, we will just go over a couple of FAQs. So, number one, we have here, how should gilts be disclosed on the SEPA transaction sheet? So, the counterparty for gilts should be DMA 888. Just a reminder, although the Public Works Loan Board is also connected with the Debt Management Office, any borrowings or other transactions with PWLB should use that CPID, should use the CPID of PWL 888. Next here we have, why is my balance sheet showing 0, but the comment says that it does not balance?
Yeah, happy to answer that. So if that happens, this could be because some of your figures have decimals, which causes the balance sheet not to balance. So in this case, we ask you to please review your data that has been entered to see which numbers have decimals in them. If this is corrected by typing in a whole number, you should then be able to validate and log your pack successfully. But remember that if you're still having issues, please contact the team by email so we can help you sort that out.
Okay, thanks, Natalia. We've got one more coming in from you guys. For SEPA transactions, what should we do if the figures of the two parties do not agree?
Okay, yeah, happy to answer this one. So if the balances are large enough for you to be completing a CG01 form to make the agreement, if you're filling out that form and you're not able to agree the balances, and there is what we would class as a significant difference in the amounts that you're saying, which is over £200,000, there's a special section within that CG01 form for you to provide more information about the reasons behind that. So as part of that process, we are asking you for more information about balance disagreements at that point, so that we can try and resolve those centrally, as that's likely to be something that comes up as part of our accounts work centrally later on if we're seeing large differences. So we'd use that information that you've given us in order to find a solution. So if the SEPA transactions are of a smaller amount than that £5 million balance, it may be that one party has entered information and the other party has perhaps not entered anything, or they disagree with the amount. So that is something that would then pop up in the matches analysis tool, which I think we mentioned briefly earlier. But if you kind of haven't gone through the DCT WGA process before, what we do is we upload all of your cycle 1 data into our system when it comes in, and we can see what's coming out of that unaudited data, and we can see where there are mismatches between what parties are saying. And we'll then send out this tool which you can use to run information on your organisation, and you can see where there are mismatches with other bodies. And that then gives you a chance to sort of resolve those differences and try and figure out what's going on, so you can change your information for cycle 2 if you need to. But I suppose just a quick note is, just because the data comes up as a mismatch on that tool, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've made an error or you haven't done something. It's just that the two parties don't agree. So it's something that would need just a little bit of investigating to figure out how or who should be correcting those figures.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much, Sally. We'll move back to the FAQs now then. Obviously, you guys keep sending them in. So the one we have here is, I've received a validation error as the pension figures on my pensions and reserve tabs don't match due to rounding. What should I do?
Yeah, I'll take this one. Thank you. As this is a red validation error, the pack is looking for the figures to be exact match. So you could either round down the pension figures or round up the reserve amount to be the total of the two pension figures. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jen. Here we have one. I've checked my opening balances and my provisions balance is being brought through as one figure into the non-current line, with the current line being blank. What should I do?
Okay, so with this one, due to the way that our SCOAs for provisions work, unfortunately we do have to bring through your provisions figure as one total into that opening balance column, and that will be the same on everyone's DCT. So we'd like you to adjust this by entering the current balance directly into the submitted figures column, and this will then automatically adjust the non-current balance. So if you do need a bit more guidance and support on that, just watch the training video on that.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Sally. We have one coming in from you guys at home here. When will the DCT forms be released?
Well, I mentioned earlier, we are trying our best. At the moment, we're in the testing stage. So hopefully within the next 2 weeks, we will release the DCT and basically after all the error being resolved. So thank you for bearing with us, and ever so sorry about this delay. But as I said, the form, whatever has changed, you already, kind of listened us and from previous part, which we thought was new and was actually changing. So hopefully you have a good idea, where we stand at the moment. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, and as mentioned before, we're going to email it out to you when it is out this year. And I think within that email, we might also include a link to the training video as well, just so you've got it all in one place to make it as easy as possible to fill in when it is out. Another question here. Has the CG01 form changed since last year, or can I just use the existing one on the WGA web page?
Okay, so the CG01 form that we're going to publish will be similar. However, one of the main differences is going to be that we'll update the counterparty list within that form to make sure that that's up to date as of this year. So totally understand that people might want to be getting on with the process of agreeing balances. But if you can, we'd recommend you just hold off for a short while to get that new updated form. And that's going to ensure that you've got all the correct counterparties in there that you need to use, and it's totally up to date for this year.
Thanks, Sally. When will the 2018-19 guidance be released on the gov.uk webpage? I think that's quite soon. Sally, do you know a bit more about the exacts?
Yeah, so at the moment it's just being cleared internally. So basically we've got the documents more or less ready to go. We're just waiting for that process of having them cleared and having it all set up on the webpage and things like that. So it shouldn't be long before that information is available.
And again, I assume we're sending out an email just as soon as it is, just to let you all know that it's ready to be read. So we've got one here. What would you advise if a department is trying to agree transactions on a cash basis and not a resource basis?
So if it's the case that you prepare your accounts on a cash basis, which we know that for various reasons there are a few accounts that are on a cash basis, obviously you're likely to end up with a balance disagreement when you're trying to agree balances with someone who creates their accounts on a resource basis. So we'd ask you to, as I was mentioning before, that process where if you have a significant difference, you provide information on the reason for that. So we'd ask you to give the information as you have in your own way of preparing the accounts, but to just provide more information and to say it's because this is prepared on a cash basis and this is prepared on a resource accounts basis. And then that then gives us the information in hand to be able to make a decision when we reach that stage of being able to deal with that difference centrally in order to resolve it. But we do understand that you'll be reflecting the information as per how you create the accounts, so that can cause some differences there.
Thanks, Sally. Thanks again. We've got one here. If there is a general election, will the WGA process be delayed? My understanding is that it won't be delayed. I don't know if anyone has anything to add to that.
No, it won't be delayed. Business as usual. So until basically the general election being announced, then we probably will telling you when the published dates. But at the moment, business as usual. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Yeah, so carry on as normal, even in that event. I say we've got one here. If we were asked to agree a balance on the CG01 form under the threshold amount, should we be doing so using the form?
Okay, so it's not necessary for you to do so if it's below that £5 million level. However, it may be something that you find helpful to do, and it may be something that's kind of generally helpful in that it reduces the error count and the number of mismatches, and therefore the number of times you might need to revisit the data. However, it's certainly not an obligation if it's below that threshold level that we do set on the CG01 form.
Thanks, Sally. One more coming from you guys. Is it necessary to report balances transactions below the threshold, as this is likely to lead to mismatches as there's no agreement process being carried out? So
yes, we would ask you that the CG01 threshold for agreeing balances via that form is quite high at that £5 million level. So we would certainly ask you to report balances that are below that level on the CP transactions form. We understand that because you haven't gone through a formal agreement process for those relatively smaller balances, it may possibly be more likely to lead to mismatches. However, if the information is omitted altogether, but the other party's reporting it, that would still lead to a mismatch. So basically what we'd ask you to do is just report your CP transactions data to the lowest level of granularity and the most information that you have available. And that puts us in the best place to be able to identify and deal with mismatches that do arise.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Sally. Just a quick one here. Can we please confirm that resource accounting basis is the same as accrual-based accounting?
Yes, yeah, I think that was in response to my answer previously. Yes, I was talking about cash versus accruals accounting there, apologies.
Yeah, thank you, Sally. I think that's all we have from you guys for the moment, so we'll move back onto the FAQs, but again, please do send them if any come to mind just while we're doing this now. Okay, so the next FAQ. I need to add a negative figure to the current assets tab, cash holdings, which is showing as invalid. How do I do this? So the problem is probably that some of the cells aren't designed to contain a negative figure. If the cash holdings is negative due to an overdraft, just please enter 0 and include the overdraft in the short-term creditors section of the liabilities and provisions tab. Okay, so next up here we have, do I need to include every CPID transaction even if it's a line of only £1,000?
Thank you. I take that one. We do not set central material level for the CPID data, but we accept that the difference, different organizations obviously have a different material based on your own accounting policy and your own size. So if your organization can set a material level and clear it with your auditors, please, and before you reach us for the DCT return. Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Next one here. What should we do if a minor body is included in our departmental group accounts, but we're not going to be collecting counterparty data from them to include on our return?
Okay, yeah, I'll answer this one. The first point, I suppose, is that if a minor body is associated with a department, there is no requirement for the department to include them at all in the WGA return if they're a minor body. However, in practice, if the department has included the minor body within their group boundary, the data prior to the CPID stage would be pulled from those departmental group accounts, and therefore they would be included. So they therefore eliminate out balances that they have between the minor body and the rest of the departmental group as part of the group accounts process. So we realise that you're unlikely to include the minor body in your CP transactions if that's going to require collecting additional data from them. So balances between the minor body and a WGA entity would therefore be treated as if they were external. So anyone who has transactions with that minor body is also going to be treating them as if they were external because they don't have that CP code. So if the minor body is not part of the departmental group boundary, we'd expect it not to feature in the accounts data, not be part of the CP data at all. So in that case, it's if the minor body is completely outside of the WGA boundary and won't feature in the data at all.
Okay, so I think we might just do one more question for this now, and that's going to be, how should we treat a dividend accrued in the DCT?
Yeah, so happy to take that. So if you, the way you treat a dividend accrued in the DCT, you record it on the reserve tab under other general fund movements, transfer of assets. So although using this score will result in a mismatch, the WGA team will create a journal during the elimination process to fix it.
Okay, thank you, Natalia. So I think then we haven't had any more questions coming in from you guys, so I think we'll draw it to a close there. So that's going to be it for the webinar today then. Thank you everyone very much for joining us today. On screen now, you've just got a quick reminder of the deadlines and the relevant links. Hopefully we've managed to answer any of the questions you may have about WGA or the DCT. If you do think of any more questions that you didn't submit or that we haven't answered, please just send us an email and we will try and get in touch regarding this. We're also going to get in contact as soon as the DCT is available. Just a quick note that now there's going to be a short survey that should appear when we end the webinar. There's going to be one on the webinar software itself and one on Slido. So if you could just pick which one you want to do, it really should only take 1 minute and it will be really helpful if you could do that. So yeah, thanks very much everybody. Good luck completing the DCT. Have a nice rest of the day and rest of the week. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.